So, I have a couple of things. I want to say one or two things. One is our responsibility, those who are in the sense leading this year. Our team leader is Rav Nachum, but our responsibility as a whole is to help bring you through this journey. But it's your own journey, meaning we will never cover all the material. This is not a kind of shir in which, well, we didn't cover it in shir. The truth is, our expectations is that you'll know Hilchot Tarovot, and you'll know Hilchot Basar B'chalav, that you review it, and that hopefully we will do key material, but the rest of it's for you as well. It's not we study a text, as it were. We study Torah, we study a text, but it's not exactly a textbook. So gotta be on top of it. And the second thing is I want to just say something regarding what's the frame that we're in as we do this. And part of the notion, the frame that we're in, is a little bit different than a Pilpul Gemara shir. And when I say Pilpul, I'm kind of emphasizing the Pilpul, which immediately everyone's on the attack. And why should be that shita? What would happen in such a situation? In general, that can be brought to an extreme as well, but there's something very good to be said about that. But it's I think it's a lot different here. Here, we're struggling at the very beginning, at least, is to find pshat. In that sense, we're also fellow travelers with the Rishonim, with the Torah and the commentaries, Shachar and the commentaries. They themselves are trying to find halachic pshat. And by that, I'm saying they're looking to what the halacha should be, and they're also trying to understand, in terms of the commentaries, what's the Torah really saying? What are the alternatives to the Torah? Alternatives are there from it, and where will that lead us? So what I'm saying that is, offer us as you're part of this. I'm not trying to stop conversation. I'm trying to direct conversation. Help offer us the pshat on what's happening as we do a keta. We do section by section. What pshat's happening? What are the main? So you'll be tempted to say, well, this goes against another principle that we have. Not yet. Find out what the principle here is. This is what we call, this is I don't like the word anymore, close reading, it's used a lot, but that's in a sense, a serious reading of what we're trying to accomplish. And today, Dafka, we are going to do a lot of reading, hopefully. And I have a few people that I sent them yesterday, help me read today, because I don't think I could read the whole thing myself. And we'll start Tzadi Chet, Daled, and I'll ask you, Noam, to read, and to the degree you want to comment. And I have what to say as well. But help me along. We are doing this together.
Are we in Torah or Shulchan Aruch?
We are in, no, we're in the Torah. Sorry, starting in the Torah, Tzadi Chet, Dalet. Hopefully we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch. So Noam, go ahead.
Sure. Velo mibaya isur shinitarev beheter b'nimuach b'tocho shesarich shishim levatlo ela afilu makiro v'hu shalem v'zarko sarich shishim keneged kol ha'isur shein anu yodim kama yatsa mimenu. So, well, previously we had been discussing when shishim is required. So the Torah sort of preempts a thought that we might have had. So he says, it's not only when we have a mixture of Isur and Heter, and then that Isur dissolved within the greater mixture, it's no longer identifiable that we need 60 to nullify it. Rather, even in an instance in which that piece, the piece of Isor is, one can recognize it and it's full, and one can even pull it out, even after it's pulled out, one still needs 60 times required the prohibited substance, because we don't know how much went from it. And they don't really say what the how much is, but I think it's going on this principle of Tom. Tom is exuding from the mixture, so from that Isor entity. So even if we remove the full thing, there is still some amount that left. We don't know how much that amount is, so we assume that it's the amount of that entire thing, even though it's been removed.
Okay. So first of all, if you have any questions or any comments, direct them right now to Noam. No, maybe you'll go through the whole, this whole first section before we go to the, I really want to be looking at the Beis Yosef. So let's continue in this section of Daled.
Sure. Lefichach, hamevashel b'kaderat isor, shehi bat yoma, o tochav kashel isor beheter, v'chi hagavna b'vasar b'chalav, sarich shishim neged kol kadera, v'keneged kol ma shekatav tachav me'akaf, shein ani yodim kama bal'o, lo shana hen shalcheres o es o matechet. So the Torah is going to give a little bit more specific case. Therefore, if one cooks in a pot of Isor that is a bat yoma, so that it has been used in an Isor sense within 24 hours, or he took a spoon and stuck it into an Isor spoon and then stuck it into heter, and all that we're talking about, taravot in general, also applies to basar v'chalav. You always need 60 against the entire pot and 60 against the entire spoon, depending on which case. And because he invokes the same principle that he invoked right before, because we don't know how much was absorbed, in how much of the Isor was absorbed into the heter. And then he makes this important clarification that it doesn't matter whether we're dealing with a kli that is made of earthenware, of wood, or of metal. According to this opinion, they are all equal, and they all have the same issue that you will always require 60 times that. Rabbeinu,
I'm sorry.
Rabbeinu. Paris hechmir bekafsha matechet latzrich shishim keneged kulo afilu lo hitniso kulo mishum decha mixato cham kukulo. So Rabbeinu Paris is stringent with regard to a metal spoon, where you require 60 times against the entire spoon, even if you didn't dip the whole spoon into it, because of this principle that when a little part of it is heated, the entire thing is heated. So even if you only dip the tip of the bowl part of the spoon into the thing, we still need to do shishim against the entire spoon when it's metal. Presumably, if we're dealing with cheres or etz, you would only have to do shishim against the part of the spoon that was actually interacting with the heter.
That will be discussed. Let me ask you, in this, how the Torah operates, we just did the majority of Daled. In Daled, you notice anything about the structure of what he's telling us? Or how he tells it? First, two parts, which is kind of connected. How does he tell us this? And with that, what's the kind of structure of his telling us?
I think he starts with two general linked principles. One is sort of the deen that we require 60 times the entire entity, and which is linked to like the meta principle that is ein anu yodim kama yatsa mimenu. So he sort of gives that as a general heading. And once he's established that, he sort of tells us how it works in practice, and gives specific cases. That is sort of my reading of the structure of this.
Okay. Anybody? Thank you. Anybody else? Well, let me ask it this way. So, Norm, when you began properly, you linked the first statement in Daled to the prior discussion. And not only are we talking, paraphrasing what you said, not are we talking about mamoshus when the mamoshus is dissolves inside the material, but we're talking about even when you, not even that, but even when you take out the whole thing. Even when you take it out, we're still worried about Tom. And the Tom we're worried about comes from the what? Comes from the plata, or the exusion of the, I don't know if that's the right word, what exudes from the Easter that was there. That next statement, I think, he goes even further. Now we're talking about where the Easter doesn't come from a mamish Easter that was there, right? That was in there, but is now something which was even Balua or only. I'm just saying it's going even more. My point is it's going even more and more out there. And I'm saying, and I ask, like, how's he telling us? I see him as like telling us almost like a narrative. We had narratives too strong, but it's almost like he's kind of telling it over. He says we have a basic halacha in Gimel, and he's gone through that. What do you do when you have the object? And now in Dalet he tells what do we do? But this actually the same halacha applies even when the object is dissolved. And not only that, even when the object is balua, it's there. And not only that, not only is the whole pot, even if it's only a kaf, it's like how the halacha, how far this impact of the notion of tam goes. That's how I see him saying it. Okay. Anybody want to comment on that? Make sense? Okay. To the degree it makes sense, except to the degree it doesn't, you don't have to. We're going to go now. We'll get the last part of Daled later. Let's go to the Beis Yosef. So when you're doing the Beis Yosef, also read the part that he cites, so to remind us where we are.
Sure. So we are looking at, well, there's the Dalet. So, okay, so the Torah said, V'lo mibaya heicha sheha'isor nitarev beheter v'nimuach b'tocho shesarich shishim levatlo ela afilu matiro v'hu shalem v'zarko sarich keneged kol ha'isor. I'll just finish. Ein anu yodim kama yatsa mimenu. So that's the Torah. V'perek gid hanasheh amrinan kechal b'shishim v'bayalan ki misharinan b'didei misharinan o b'mai dinafak minei misharinan. So in Perek Gid Hanashe in Chulin, we said that an udder requires 60 times it in order to nullify the meat-milk mixture that might come because of it. Like the udder itself is meat, and then the milk in it is potentially is dairy. And we asked that when we are nullifying that udder, do we just measure the amount that needs to be nullified against the udder itself, meaning the entire thing, or do we just need to measure against that which was exuded from the udder, which would be a lesser number? Umehadrinan pshita debidin.
By the way, okay, good. By the way, not just a lesser number. That's a very good point. And by being a lesser number, it would make it much more probable that we can be mevatel it. The whole thing of getting shishim against the whole pot is a difficult matter. I'm talking about a strategic move here. So that if you say it's really shishim keneged the Isur itself, then you're entering much more the realm of possibility of getting it. Well, if you keep it a chishim against the pot, we're talking about usually a very large number, or maybe an impossible number. We'll get that in the conversation. So it's like a very important question here. Okay, go on.
Okay. Pshita de b'didei misharinan di'i b'mai denafak minei mana yadinan. So it's obvious that we measure against the udder itself. For if we were measure from that which comes out of the udder, how are we supposed to know? So
yeah, okay. So I'm sorry that I jumped the gun going to the pot, which is the next thing, but this is on the udder. Thank you. But then they apply that.
So we see the Gemara's principle of like, how do we know? That's from Chulin, and then the Beit Yosef the Torah sort of interjects that into what we're talking about as well.
Great, thank you.
And what status does that put it in? In other words, that requirement to view the whole thing. In other words, is that
it's a chumrah because we have a safek there.
it's a chumrah because we have a safek, and why? Just harping back on something else, it's a safek, right? This is a safek. The Gemara is essentially saying, in a safek situation, be machmir. Why? Because it's Rabbanan.
Yeah, that's what he wants.
Right.
D'oraita.
But then it puts us in the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam. No?
Tam ki kar
Right.
deraita.
Yes, Tam Kikar D'oraita. In other words, it's a suffix, and he's learning suffix, and we have to be machmir.
But he just gave us Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, and now
Yes.
he's treating it as if it's D'oraita, which means he's kind of pushing towards Rabbeinu Tam.
Yes. In other words, this is another indication that the Torah is posketing like Rabbeinu Tam.
I would just throw out there, they don't discuss it here. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, you're right. No. Thank you for bringing it up. And I just like to add that it seems to be a particularly weighty Iser D'Rabbanan. And one of the things that some of the some of the poskim will say is because there's an element of Shavia Alehem Chaticha D'Isur. In other words, they made it into, it's not just an imposed Isur.
Yes.
Everyone is because they have to deal with your problem because it's only a D'Rabbanan. So they have to say it's particularly weighty D'Rabbanan.
Right. The Bedek Habayit says that. Exactly.
Okay, so we okay. Now, Noam, who's the Bedek Habayit?
It's the Beit Yosef. After the Beit Yosef was published, there are people who criticized him, so he wrote sort of a response, and that was the Bedek Habayit.
Okay, good. So now give us the Bedek Habayit.
Uchtov ve'orcha chaim v'chol ma shehu domeh lekachal kegon lev bekaved misharinan b'ma denafak minei lefi omer hadat v'lo misharin b'didei v'dafka bekachal misharin b'didei mishum yasa ohu kechaticha nevela. So the Orchot Chaim writes, it's written in the Orchot Chaim that anything that which is similar to the udder, like the heart or the liver, we measure it according to that which it goes out. So we have a different standard than what we do have for the udder. Lafi Omer Adat, based on like a measured understanding. And we don't measure against against the actual entity, because it is only with regard to the udder where we measure against itself, because it made itself into chanan, chatichat natzeh nevela. Aval bal hatruma katav b'chulan mishar'in b'didei de'i b'may denafach minei loya dinan. The Baal Truma, so Truma Deshen, I believe, right? Writes that for all these things, whether it's the udder, whether it's the liver, whether it's the heart, we measure it according to everything that goes out from it, because we measure it all according to itself, because we have no idea how to measure what would have just gone out of it. V'chen gedat harashba, and this is also the opinion of the Rashba. Uvir od ve'amar lo bisurim amru ella afilu bisurim shel devarim akan lashono. And he explains that when we're talking about this principle, it's not only with regard to biblical prohibitions, but even with rabbinic prohibitions, we still measure against the entire thing and not just that which goes out of it.
It's like everything is shavuya katichat isur.
Right.
Yeah. Because we don't know. Now, there'll be an attempt, I'll say it now, because we saw here the day, that we'll go with Omed, a measured measure, you're right? You said a well-measured. But a lot of times they'll say Omed Yafa. And Omed Yafa would be, we'll see it. Omed Yafa means a generous estimation. Because to go to, again, I repeat myself, but to go to this notion that you have to do the whole thing becomes extraordinarily difficult. So do an Omed, but an Omed might not be, so do the Omed Yafa, and that might take care of it, and that will be a competing notion. Continue reading, please.
In the Beit Yosef. Shehi bat yoma o tochav kaf shel isor beheter v'chi hagavna bevasar bechalav sarich shishim keneged kol hakadera. I'll keep reading the Torah. Keneged kol masha katav me'akash and anu yodim kama balo ushna hen shacharis os o matechet kakatuv harashba b'tor habayit ve'afal pi shechatav b'shem Ravad Zal Shelo Amru Ella B'Isor She'eno Choser L'Hachshiro Kechachal Ukayotze Bo V'chen B'Kadera Shel Cheres She'eno Yotze Midei Dapav Le'olam Aval B'Kadera Shel Matecha B'Kaf Shel Et Ukayotze Bo Ein Misharin B'Chulo Ella Umdin Omed Yafeh Kemo Yatsa Mimenu Umesharin Bo. So
Okay.
this is so Beit Yosef tells us that the Torah is quoting the Rashba, and this is the case, even though that he wrote in the name of the Ravad that they only required this larger measurement, we'll say, with the type of prohibition that sort of can't be rectified, sort of like the udder. And anything similar to that, or a pot or earthenware pot, in which the Isor will never fully leave its walls. But with regard to a metal pot or a wooden spoon or anything similar to like that, we don't need to measure against the whole entity. Rather, and this is where this Omed Yafa comes in, rather we only need to measure against a generous estimate, such that we can know to consider like that which came out of it, and we measure against that only, and not the whole thing. Kavar Katav.
No. Before we go any further, so we have a new principle. Whether or not we're going to fully use it, but the hard for me to say Rabbi. The Ravid offers us. He offers us a new principle, and you said the principles, but restate the principle. The Ravid gives us the principle that
He distinguishes between entities, whether they're pots or whether they're foods that are totally out, things that you're never going to be able to make permitted. And those are the types of things that you need to require a full 60 measure against them. But for other things like a metal spoon or a wooden spoon or whatever, in which technically you could make them kasher, those you can just measure against that which comes out of them.
So
You can
what's
use
the
the lower
logical?
threshold.
Yeah. So what's an explanation for him, for the Ravid saying it, making this distinction? I'm asking in general. Anybody else has an idea? What's the? It sounds appealing. It sounds logical, even, but who can articulate it? Joel, do you have an articulation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the Hanan Bechelim question, right? Does the whole kli become itself like an isur, and so therefore we have to measure against the whole kli? And it's a question of is if Charles Sochto, if you can remove it, then if they're separable, the isur from the thing that it's imbibed by, then the whole thing cannot become an isur. And I think the Ravad is kind of playing that out with both kalim, but maybe also other examples as well.
So the strategic move here for the Ravid, and I agree with your parallels that you said, and you can talk about them as one thing. The strategic move is to reserve shishim, let's say not in a positive way, only for those things which are irredeemable. They're irredeemable except for shishim. In other words, so you have to have shishim against the whole thing. But does that work? How would you say it? I almost thought I had it, but I don't have it. Joel, say it in a positive way. I try to go there.
That I think it's the thing. I don't know if this is positive. The thing doesn't actually fully become an isur unless it's like permanently an isur, right? And therefore, you don't have to measure against the whole thing unless it fully becomes.
Okay, so it still has some resistance. These are strategic moves. They end up making a very big difference. Okay, so
Can I make a comment?
yes, Lexi.
Oh, wait, Lexi, go ahead.
I was just going to say this kind of reminds me in some sense about some of the Ramban's hedging around when we do and don't need to care about shishim when you've removed things, just in the sense of saying in cases where using shishim is already a chumrah, when there are additional factors that would lend towards us having a mekil ruling, that's a possibility. So the Rabbad's saying us measuring shishim against the entire thing, even in any of these cases, is already a chumrah because b'derech klal, the entire thing probably did not emerge into whatever mixture you have. And given that, plus this extra concept that he brought in of choser lehechshero, he's there's these multiple levels that allow me to give this more mekil ruling of mataneh fak mineh.
Okay, so I want to say, first of all, I agree. Second of all, we didn't do the Ramban yet. And according to my rules at the beginning, we didn't say
I thought we did it yesterday. I thought we did it last week.
It's true. But let's get through this.
Can I just make
No. Wait. But I would just phrase it instead of Mako here. I would just say we're not extending extending the chumrah. I'm only saying it that way. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would say it that way because it's extraordinary. As I'm saying, it's extraordinarily chumrah when we ever have. And I'm repeating it. When we have a situation where we don't have to extend it that far, there will be those, not everybody. There will be those who say don't extend it that far. Okay, let's continue. That was good. Continue. Kavar Kotav.
Kvar Katav, the Rishon Nira Ikar. So it's already been written that the first opinion, meaning that of the Rashba, in which we don't distinguish between the two types and we do everything based on 60, against the whole thing, is the correct opinion, is the essence. The Katav sheken dat Rabbeinu Hatzarfatim v'chen dat Ramban. And that's also the opinion of our French rabbis, so probably Tosfot, and the Ramban. The Kam midivrei Haran the Perak Yid Hanasheh nireh shehu notel l'svarat hatosvot the kevan the talinan ta'ama mishum delo yadinan kama nafak mineh afilu b'davar hachozer l'hachshiro misharina b'chulo. And also by the words of the Ran in Perak Yid Hanasheh, where he appears to side with the Tosfot, that since we hang on the reason, we utilize the reason that we don't know how much went out from it. This applies even with regard to something that can theoretically become fit again. Even with regard to those things, we measure against the entire entity.
Rabbi Danzig, quickly.
Yeah, I just want to point out what's going on here. What's going on here, in the way I see it, is we're questioning whether the din of requiring 60 is because of Hanan, in which case, and therefore it matters whether the kli is a kli that is clay or metal. Is it a din of Hanan, or is it not a thing to do with Hanan? It's just a suffix. We don't know how much is in the wall. And,
Excellent.
And it's a
So
suffix.
I'm going to respond.
Like
No. That's perfect. Except it'll be great. Like you enjoyed it. Why did you enjoy it right now when we interpret your enjoying it? Because you saw it, right? I mean, you see it. But because they don't discuss it exactly.
They don't discuss it exactly. It's not spelled out. Exactly.
It's not spelled out. Now, wait. And it's not, what's not spelled out? Let's just say it again.
That this is the fulcrum.
Whether or not it's a din of Hanan, and therefore it's kulo aser, or is it a din of a true suffix? And if he did it with a true suffix, maybe you would say omed yafa, but maybe others would say no, it's still forget omed yafa, suffix.
And the Torah thinks it's a suffix.
By the way, what we'll see here is, because I'm going to do this on time, what we're going to see here, and this I think is helpful, there's sometimes a blurring of these two reasons. When you read it, there's a blurring of it. And the blurring is because it has the same impact. The impact is you need 60. You need 60 for kulo. But it's a big difference whether we say Hanan, I'm just repeating Rav Nachman, which is essentially, or what he wants to say, and I stopped him, which is essentially usher, and the notion of lo yadainan, which is a very chomer suffix, a very weighty, a weighty suffix. But you would think that in terms of what their essential structures are, they're somewhat different. It's interesting. So let's hold on to that. And let's see if we get any help anywhere about that. Kotava Mordechai.
Kotava Mordechai.
Mordechai was a Talmud of who? He was Talmud of the Rashal, Shlomo Luria, who was a big opponent of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and a Talmud of the Ramah. It was, good teachers. Okay.
Kotava Mordechai, Perak Yira Nashe. B'Shem Haravia, Heach Misharim Shishim Neged Kol HaKli HaYisor, Mimal'im Kli Gadol Maleh Mayim, V'Yitan HaKedera HaSura Toch Oto Kli, V'Hamayim HaYotzim Hen Hem Shi'ur Dofnei HaKedera, V'Yishar B'Heter Keneged Otam HaMayim. So Mordechai writes in the name of the Rabbiah, how we're supposed to measure 60 against the entire prohibited vessel. So we fill a big vessel full of water, and then we place the prohibited vessel into that bigger vessel full of water, and then the water that's displaced, that's considered the shear that you need to do 60 against that. So then you measure 60 heter against the displacement, the measure from the displacement of water that went out.
Okay, good. And just finish it up.
Umasha Amar Lushna Hen Shel Cheres, O Shel Es, O Shel Matechet, Barbenu Peret Techmir B'Kaf Shel Matechet, Kfar Nifa'er B'Siman Tzadi Daled.
Okay, that's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to go in a moment. I just want to point out to you in the Prisha. Okay, look at the Prisha. On the left side, Afiu Makiro Vahushal. I'm going back there. He says something very important. Perush Shalo Ra'inun Bo Shum Shinui Masher Haya B'Tchila V'Gam Lo Yadanu Sheniflat Mimenu Shum Davar. We don't know nothing. It's kind of interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. We'd see something and then you do an omen. You have to do an omed a lot of times, and even omed yafa when you don't even see any difference, because you still don't know. It doesn't look different to you, but you still don't know what's going to happen there. So let's go back to Tzadi Dalet in the Torah.
What changed? What did you? Is it that the piece itself got smaller? The Isser fell in, and it was like a big piece, and now you pull it out and smaller, and so you guess how much is come out. That's what's going on.
He says even if you see nothing.
Right, but I'm saying, but the Havamina is that you
Yeah,
would
the
see
Havamina is you have to see something, or you say like it was impervious.
it looks the same when it
It
comes
was
in and out.
coated in something. It was coated in something. It didn't have time, even though the water was hot. Maybe there's reticha. Maybe nothing really happened. I'm just pointing out what the Prisha seems. What he says seems to be what you just pointed out was the Havamina, that we should see some difference. And what the Prisha says, the working assumption is even if you don't see anything, it's no good. Now look at Tzadi Daled at the beginning, Aleph at Tzadi Daled. And the other thing, which of course is going to be a constant challenge as you learn Yeridea, even Tarobot. When are they talking about Basar B'Cholav and when are they talking about Isur? And when are they saying Cholav and when are they saying Chelav? And don't feel badly about it, because even in the commentaries they'll say sometimes it's a Tzera. It's not a Tzera. It's a it's a Komatz. So whatever. But now we're going. But I'll just say like this, because the ongoing question is, how far does the pair? How much? I'll say that. How much is Basar B'Cholav not only a halach in itself, but also a paradigm for all other isurim? Or when can you say? And there'll be those who will say it's a paradigm, and there'll be others who say no, shari isurim is totally different. But most people are somewhere in the middle. So if you should start sketching that as you learn, because that's an ongoing question. So let me read quickly. Tochev kaf cholevet, the milchik spoon, the kedera shel basar, ipcha, fleshik spoon in dairy. Misharin b'chol masha tochav mimena b'kedera. Delo yadinen kama nafak mina. Same halacha, right? Seems to be. Rabbeinu Peretz Kasachim Akapshal Matachim Sharminim Bekula Af Mashal Nichnas Mimena Bekeder Mishum Cham Yisosacham Kulo. But just in the language of the Torah, it sounds very similar to what we learned. Do you notice any difference between Tzadi Daled and what we just did in Tzadi Chet? In Tzadi Daled, he just says, figure it out. He says, give an omed. He doesn't tell us that that you're not going to be able to figure it out, and therefore, or he doesn't even lend us to see that. Okay, good. Am I right? Am I right about that? All right. Don't
Sorry,
tell
I
me
didn't
I'm
follow
wrong.
that. What is the difference?
The difference, I have to look at both. Anyway, in Tzadi Daled, you would be, the underlying assumption in Tzadi Daled seems, in reading the Torah, that you can figure out how much of the Eser hit how much of the Heter.
Oh, isn't
But it
just
says
about how
below
much
yadinon kama nafak
goes in?
mina.
I'm sorry. So why did I read it that way? Thank you. So I read it wrong. Because when I read it, the kama nafak mina is it says
Because it says bechol ma
b'chama. So I
shetachaz.
said it totally wrong. Thank you for the correction. Same thing. Same halacha. I apologize. Now, in my abashed circumstance, I will continue to read. Go into the Beis Yosef. Tochechav cholos b'geder shel basar ibcha m'sharin b'chol ma shetachav mimenu b'geder d'lo yodin
Wait,
kama
are
nofal
you in
mina.
Sadi Dalet or in Sadi Chet?
I'm back in Sadi Dalet.
Hmm.
I'm in Sadi Dalet in Basar b'cholav.
Okay.
And here it's Pasha. Klomar ha de beinen l'shure b'chol ma shetachav mimena. Below sagilon l'shure b'tam basar habelua b'ma shetachav mimena v'niflat b'toch hachalav o ibcha. Hainu tama mishum d'lo yidein kama nafik mina. Hilkach beinen l'shure b'chol ma shetachav mimena. Do we have any new information here?
No.
Okay. Umiu, hechash yodua kama bal'a, kagon shoista chadasha v'nier ba kazayv chalav, v'achakach tachva b'kadera basar oibcha, kevish yodua shalo haita b'lua, ela mikazayas, ain't tzarich l'shaer ela b'kazayas, unless you know. So I would say the one thing that he's telling us now, we'll see it later in Sarichet, but the one thing he's telling us now is there is the possibility of knowing, or at least there's the possibilities of knowing, and it's not a metaphysical fact that you never know. There are cases in which you do know. And that's Kotzav Rabbeinu and Sarichet, we'll see that, right? Usfor zu de lo mitzrachol l'sharer el b'masha tach mimena, v'lo miflaga bein shel eis l'shel matachet, v'savar to Rabbeinu Peres the matzrich b'shel matachet l'sharer the kulo mishum deklei matachacham misatocham kulo shtein kotav smak the Siman Reshud Gimel avol b'sharei dura kotav stam svara rishona. It just says Sfor Rishona. The notain tam dafal pi sheheim mixato cham mixato cham kulo mikol makom lo amrin daholich b'liato. Right? That it may be if you heat up one part of the metal, the rest of it will also be impossible to touch, but doesn't mean the b'lia necessarily moves forward. And therefore, you can say the opposite halacha. You can say the halacha that you go by the place. V'chein yirashu dat ba'al truma, and etc. Is there anything else I want to say? Look at the Beta Kabayit. Kotav Rabbeinu Yerucham, okay? B'shem Arayvad. Rabbeinu Yerucham, by the way, was Provence, right? It was just right after the Rayvad. B'kedera. Oh, kaf shel cheres she'ena chozer lehetero can never become mutar again. Mesharinin bekulo avakadera shel matechet o kaf o kara shel eitz umdim kama isur yotzei mimena. You can figure it out. The omed yafa, so just be generous. We want to make a situation that we can be makel. Below, did I say that? But that's what he said. Below mesharinin bekulo v'haramban. Katav de ein nira lo chalek el bekul misharinan bekulo. Doesn't make that that, and he gives us something that we need to know very soon. Echtov shehi skimbo of poskim b'divrei haramban that it has to be kulo. Umiu hecha delo nier bekaf ela ma'at. But if you really didn't. You only stuck it in, and you started maybe to turn it around to mix. Ela ma'at chalav the tachava b'kedera shel basar. So at the very beginning, you only got a little milk in. Ein misharin ela b'oto chalav shenir v'lo b'chol hakaf. So there, when they can find, there is a surge to try to find those possibilities. Continuing what Alexia said, those possibilities of kula. And here that the original sin, the original problem was not such a big problem to begin with, and we can contain it. And that's all that I wanted to say here. So now we'll go back to Tzadi Chet. Let's go back to Tzadi Chet. No, let's now go to the, let's go to, what do you call that other book that we use? Shulchan Aruch. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch, Mechaber, and Tzadi Chet. Tzadi Chet Daled. And Noam, you're willing to continue?
I am. I just need to get it open. Sorry. Okay. All right. Isor sheni pashel heter afilu makiro v'hu shalem v'zarko sarich shishim keneged kol ha'isor mipnei shen anu yodim kama yatsa mimenu. Lefichach hamevashel b'kterat isor shehi bat yoma o tochev kaf shel isor b'heter sarich shishim keneged kol ha'kedera ukeneged kol ma shetachav me'akaf. Shein anu yodim kama balo, pein shem shel cheres, o et o matechet. So that was a pretty good restatement of the Torah.
Yeah, it was great. And does it sound any different? Not the contents is the same. Does it sound talking about the manner of delivery?
It's slightly different because in the Torah, he directly linked it with the umimaya lay to the previous halacha, and here it stands as its own entity.
Yeah,
Right. That's exactly the point, because the Beis Yosef says it's not necessarily connected to chalav, to kachal.
Interesting. That's very good. In other words, you don't need my interpretation, but the Beit Yosef.
Beit Yosef, exactly. Beit Yosef says it's not so clear what the reason is.
Man is
exactly what you said.
Now moving it away from total reliance or identifying it with kachal. Is that true or not true?
I think exactly. I think he's exactly. He doesn't want to get into that question. It seems to be a machloket. So he's just
okay.
He's going in the direction of Hanan, really.
I think we can fight around a little bit with that, but that's good. Will you do the shach on the section you did? Isur nishpashel.
Isur sheni pashel afilu isur derabanan.
Good.
So we saw this in the Beit Yosef too, that this applies to rabbinic prohibitions as well. Sarich shishim neged kol hakadera perush ve'imken asor hatavshil shebekadera de'ein ma shebetocha kli shishim neged hakli. So therefore, this means that the entire dish in the pot is prohibited because you don't have 60 against the entire vessel.
So he presents us with the fatal problem of the halacha is that once you do shishim against kula, you're always headed toward, seemingly, you're always headed towards Isur, because you just said. So some will respond to the shach and say, well, if you have it's made out of brass, it's very thin brass, it's pounded, maybe you can really get there, or maybe they just stuck a lot of stuff in and stuff's on top. But at the very least, this comment shows why we're also looking for all the times in which we don't have to go kikulo, that we can go with an omed yafa, because what's the hope? There's no hope then. Doesn't get anywhere. I mean, it's a devastating sentence, right? V'im kein asur hatavshil shebekeder she'ein ma b'toch hakli samach neged hakli. I guess if you think of these really big, large pots, these kind of heavy pots, and therefore part of the answer is, well, maybe the technology can change and you have thin pots, but even that's very difficult. I don't have an answer for that than the answer I just provided you with. I don't have any other answer for that. If you think of one, let us know. Okay, did we go further than this? Bein Shaim Shalcheres? Okay.
There's one more shach that based on what I read. Bein Shem Shalcheres Klomar La Puke Sfarat Haravad Ravid the Spherele the Es Umatecha Kevan de Ashar La Frid Haisor Yide Hagala Ein Mar Shar'in V'chulo Ella Omdin Omer Yafeh Kama Yatsa Mimenu Ella Ein Chiluk. So he says what we said before, that according to the Shulchan Aruch, according to Beit Yosef, we don't differentiate like the Ravid wants us to, but basically everything we do needs to be against the whole vessel.
Okay. When you say Ein Chiluk, what is it? Just help with that. What does it mean by Ein Chiluk?
We don't differentiate between the Bitul standards of vessels that can theoretically become fit again, and vessels that cannot theoretically become fit again.
So here we had the opening for a kula, and it gets shut down in the shach. Is the shach expressing the Shulchan Aruch, or is expressing himself?
He's expressing the Beit Yosef, because Beit Yosef did present both opinions and said we don't go by this.
This, by the way, so now we had very interesting. So right a moment ago, Rav Nachum showed how the Shulchan Aruch is impacted by the Beit Yosef's feeling about Kachal. And over here, we see that Shulchan Aruch doesn't seem to have the Beit Yosef fully, and the Shach has the Beit Yosef. And what's important here is that correct? I think that's correct. So what you have here is something always to look towards also, is when the Beit Yosef and the Mechaber are in sync and when they're not in sync. The Shach pulls them back into sync. But as you're pulling back to sync, had the Beit Yosef changed his mind? Had the Shulchan Aruch changed his mind from what he thought as the Beit Yosef? I believe that as generally the questions we often have. One should not automatically assume, I'll say it this way, one should not automatically assume that everything that's in the Shulchan Aruch, I'm saying, that's in that 100%, maybe 90%, that everything in the Shulchan Aruch has been there before, but now in a different form, already there in the Beit Yosef. It's not my best example, but I'll use it anyway. Maybe or maybe not. What do you got, Yavni?
But in this case, the Shulchan Aruch is agreeing with the Beit Yosef. He's just not bringing the dissenting opinion that the Beit Yosef brings and rejects. And right? Am I correct? And the Shach brings it up.
That's correct.
So therefore, it's even better. I'm wrong once again. This is why I come here. I'm wrong once again. It's actually the opposite. Here, the Shulchan Aruch is exactly even more than the Beit Yosef, because he doesn't bring the other opinion. And therefore, it's a better proof that Shulchan Aruch follows the Beit Yosef. But mark my words, he doesn't always follow the Beit Yosef.
He doesn't. He does imply it strongly here. By the fact, this is, I think, the Shach has pointed out the fact that he says, right, Bein Shehem Shalcheres O Eitz O Matech, he could have left that out, and it could have made perfect sense and essentially been the same deen, right? The fact he feels very conscious about the fact that there is this other shita out there, and I want either a lot of people are following it and he wants to get rid of it, or he feels it even in the Shulchan Aruch and he wants people to know it's there, but that it's a nice havamina. We're not going to follow it, something like that.
Like
I
it's
don't
like
know.
that's what the biblical critics say about why God mentions that He created the teninim. Why does it say in the Torah that He mentions the teninim? He made everything. We have to mention He made the teninim. Like we have to mention kli cheres. Of course, everything's the same. So they say. I've heard this from Professor Knoll. He said because there were other myths that said that there was a tanin that fought with God. No. God created the tanin. Go against the Havamim.
Okay. Yeshkech. Okay.
Parshat
There's
Shavua.
more to do here, but we actually just did the major part of Daled, and we did Daled. We went back to Samad Bet to hear the precursor of it. We went to Shulchan Aruch. We see how it's done. The only thing I would have now, Noam, is just finish reading. It's going to take a moment, but finish reading the Mechaber and then the Ramah.
Okay, can I just go right into the Ramah? So that's where we are right
Yes, go the Ramah, right.
ובלבד שבלעו על ידי רתיחת אש, שאז הבליעה הולכת בכל הכלי. אבל על ידי רתיחת המליחה, אינו נראה בכלי רק כדי קליפה, ואין צריך לשער רק כדי קליפה.
Okay, and I'll point out that the Shach adds that Irui also just gives us Kidei Klipa, which is kind of like skinning it, just taking off the end piece. But he says in a case of Kivisha, which is marinated in, it may be Aser Kulo. All those three terms, Melicha, Irui, and Kibush, they will be your friends. But here Kibush is very important. The Yeshmi,
ויש מי שמחמיר בכך שהמתכת להצריך 60 כנגד כולו, אפילו לא הכניס אלא מקצת משום דחה מקצתו חם ככולו. So this was the opinion of Rabbeinu Peretz that he quotes.
Go on, great. I'll go.
ונוגעים כסבר ראשונה. וכל איסור שמבטלים ב-60, אם מכירו צריך להסירו, משם אף על גב וכבר נתבטל טעמו ב-60, ולכן אם נפל חלב לתוך התבשיל ונתבטל טעמו ב-60, צריך ליתן שם מים צוננים, וטבע החלב להקפיא לצוף למעלה של המים, ויסירנו משם דמאחר דאפשר להסירו, הווה כאילו מכירו, וצריך להסירו משם. Okay, so first of all, the Ramah says that we don't go by Rabbeinu Peretz, and that we don't be machmir by the case of a metal vessel. So we don't need to go based on the entire vessel, just that which was dipped. And then he says that any prohibition in which we do 60 times against it, said that if you see the forbidden entity, you need to remove it, even though it was technically nullified in 60. And so he gives a specific example about what happens when fat drips in. So when fat drips in order to make sure that you can remove it, you have to put a little bit of water on top of it so that the fat will float to the surface, congeal and float to the surface. You remove the fat, and because since theoretically the fat can congeal in that way, it's considered as if it's makiro, and you therefore need to remove it.
Therefore, we have a new mitzvah to say. We have to get rid of the Isur. No matter what form the Isur is in, we have to do. Let's say we don't have shishim, but you have amazing success with the cold water science experiment at home, and all your chaylev rises to the top, and you're able to scoop, it's clear you're able to scoop it all out. What does that do for us? Anybody can answer?
It gives this like additional imperative to what's expected of us when it comes to the removal of the Isser, that it's not just like it's like so clearly ba'ayin, right? That like I could pluck this out and take it as it is. That like if there's actually a feasible way that I could separate the Isser, even if that's not the way it's currently existing, I'm like expected to do so.
So in terms of the mitzvah say idea, I'm with you. I think you're right. And now that I'm still going to ask, what happens if you don't have shishim?
So both the Shach and the Taz bring this up, right? That there's an idea out there that because you could remove the whole thing, essentially, like you make it separable, that you don't need shishim. But they say that the Ramah is ruling that you do need shishim, and this is like any other Isur that falls in. You remove the Isur, you still need shishim.
Yeah, it's like a separate. What Alexi was saying, it's like a separate, not separate. It's like an additional. I'll just use your words. Your words are right. It's an additional imperative. You see it, you shouldn't be able to stand it. You got to get rid of it. But as Noam says, it's technically been mevutal, but it's only technically been mevutal when there's shishim. Okay, this is where we're ending right now. We're going to go to Hey and Vav after a 5-minute break. Thank you. Merely because we're nice people, and the rabbis should be nice people in making decisions, but al yesh al ma lismach, because there are plenty of poskim who say about regarding these distinctions, that those things that can, so that efshar lakashro, efshar lachazor, it can return back to its original status, is a very real opinion. And therefore, because of that, we can say, so therefore you have to be basically the answer here is you have to be a Talmid Chacham. You have a little heart, without having no heart, a little heart and a big brain this time around will go a long distance. So I think we're done. Lexi, yeshkoach to you. Yavni, yeshkoach to you. Noam, yeshkoach to you. I think